let's see what the news has in store for us this week. Now, we're going to give Copilot a kick up the bum and see if we get to use him this week. Let's see. No problems with Copilot this week, as opposed to last week, which was very difficult. We couldn't get him to tell us anything. He wouldn't verify. Couldn't verify that I was human, evidently. So here are the most significant UK-related news stories from the past 7 days. Belfast unrest, far-right mobilisation and immigration tensions. Independent outlet The Conversation reported on how the recent Belfast riots illustrate the growing influence of far-right narratives around immigration amplified through social media. Now, I have seen some of the information that's been on social media about the problems in Belfast. And it looks to be really quite upsetting. It's upsetting, I think, for people that live in that area. However, I think that the general tensions that are happening at the moment, the people feel the need to speak. And although I don't condone rioting at all in any way, shape or form, I do condone protesting. And if protesting is curbed, if people aren't able to have their say, if people aren't able to say what they need in order for things to change, then that's an issue. That's a big issue. And I can see it being a big issue in the UK, not just Northern Ireland. So something to keep an eye on, I feel. I have a friend who lives in Belfast, and my concern was that she would be feeling really quite upset, and she is. She's feeling unsteady when it comes to what's going on. So there are lots of people who are affected by this. Point 2, Henry Nowak protests and related violence. Alternative sources such as Yorkshire Byline and Your Voice covered developments around the Henry Nowak case, including protests, violent disorder charges and community responses. You'll remember from last week the Henry Nowak case. I don't know whether it's Novak or Nowak case was mentioned and had been mentioned by some of our politicians. Farage decided to utilise it as a political speaking point, and then Starmer effectively did exactly what Farage did. He didn't use the same words. He didn't tell people that they should be enraged or anything, but he used it as a political talking point at Farage. So the politicians are utilising the Nowak case for themselves, for their own ends. It's outrageous that our police force are not doing their job adequately. When somebody is laying on the ground saying they can't breathe because they've been stabbed, it is incumbent upon our police to investigate that. And if an investigation had been made at the point that the young man mentioned that he'd been stabbed, then possibly he wouldn't have died while being handcuffed face down on the floor. Our police force have a lot to answer for. I did mention last week that as far as I was concerned, the situation is difficult because, yes, they don't know the facts of the case when it's happening in front of them. They're not aware of the facts of the case, but that does not excuse inaction. It doesn't matter whether they believed one over the other. They shouldn't have not acted in the best interests of both parties, regardless of who was in the wrong. When somebody tells you that they've been stabbed, it's your duty as a police officer to investigate that, physically to investigate that. And from my point of view, that is the problem here. Point 3, Royal Naval helicopter crash in Devon. Now, we covered this on the day it happened. It happened in the morning of last Wednesday when we did our live. Independent platform Your Voice reported a major tragedy in Devon where 3 people died in a Royal Navy helicopter crash, offering non-mainstream analysis and local angle reporting. Well, we still don't have all the facts on this. So like I said last week, we don't know if this is human error. We don't know if this is mechanical failure. We're really not sure. It's tragic that 3 people died. So my heart and my love goes out to their family members. However, we still don't have the full information. Until we do, maybe Claude or Grok might have a little bit more to report on that. Point 4, youth investment. £10 million lifeline for Britain's young people. Your Voice highlighted a significant £10 million investment initiative aimed at supporting youth development in the UK, framed through a social impact lens rather than political spin. Well, that's very interesting, because when you look at the amount of recreational centres that used to be open, that children and young people were able to go to basically play games, or play table tennis, learn new skills, meet up with other people, just have some guidance in the community. Most of those have closed. So it will be interesting to see where this £10 million investment is actually going to. And it says it's framed through a social impact lens rather than political spin. Well, I would suggest that if £10 million is being invested, there's some sort of politics involved in that, because that investment is going to have come from a political slant. So it may say no political spin, but I'm not really sure that that's very true. And if they're going to invest it back into the centres that they've closed, then that might be a good idea. But that would beg the question of why the centres were closed in the first place. Point 5, green health trial in Yorkshire. Nature-based medicine. Excellent. A notable alternative media story focused on a Yorkshire green prescription trial demonstrating measurable health benefits from nature-based interventions. Well, I do know that at some point, I think it was last year, that government were actually saying, I'm sure it was government, the health minister was actually saying that it would be very good if people got out and about into nature. And I agree wholeheartedly that that's a great way to start when it comes to nature-based medicine. What would be a great furtherment of that would be to reintroduce things like meditation, to take people out into nature and introduce meditation, introduce yoga, possibly, different natural health beneficial practices that people can take part in. But if you're going to do nature-based medicine, I would argue it needs to start at birth. That if we had meditation from school, it would become second nature, talking of nature. If we had nature-based activities in school that incorporated nature-based medicine, then that would be a really good start. So we'll keep an eye on it. It's a green health trial in Yorkshire. It may well be aimed at older people. I would hope that if it is aimed at older people, that after the trial and after they see the success, hopefully, of the trial, that they will think about incorporating some of this into our school system. Point 6. Prince William's comments on protecting British pubs. Covered by Your Voice, this story explored cultural heritage and community resilience rather than usual royal family framing. Well, that's a bit like shutting the door after the horse has run away, isn't it? Exploring cultural heritage and community resilience. With our pubs shutting at a great rate every single day in this country, I'm Prince William jumping on the bandwagon to protect British pubs might be a little bit not so great, because when was the last time he set foot in a traditional British pub? And I would also argue that we don't really have traditional British pubs anymore. You know, the old kind of wet pub, not food related, where you'd walk in and there'd be little pockets of guys sitting there chatting away. There'd be the boys at the pumps. They'd stand there at the bar, like guarding their pump, because that's where their beer comes from. And the regulars, that's all gone. Our British wet pub is a thing of the past. It's very, very difficult to find one now. And you can't really blame the publicans, because the publicans need to do what they have to do in order to stay in business. And that means that they have to make their revenue through food. And that has just slowly inched the wet pub out of our culture. So unless Prince William is jumping on that bandwagon to bring back a wet pub, well, we'll see. Point 7, Belfast stabbing case and community response. UPI, non-UK, non-mainstream, and Anadolu Agency provided independent reporting on the Belfast stabbing suspect, community tensions, and the wider political implications. I did see something about this. It was a chap from a different country who had stabbed somebody. Stab somebody's probably quite a lame way of explaining what he actually tried to do. The reports that I read were he was trying to actually hack off somebody's head in some way. And yeah, there are people who stepped up in the community and stopped it from happening. I'm unsure of the outcome. I'm unsure of what's happened to the chap that was attacking the other person and to the person that was attacked. I will look into it. But that's point 7, and that is it from Copilot. Thank you very much, Copilot, this week for actually engaging with me. I'll tell you now, I had to go all around the houses to get Copilot to work. I had to flush my cache. I had to flush everything out of my computer's memory because Microsoft wouldn't have it. So that's it for Microsoft. From a health and wellbeing point of view, probably not a great deal that I would dive deeply into, apart from keeping an eye on this green health trial in Yorkshire and seeing where they go with it, where they run with it, and see what happens. So that's it from Copilot. Now we'll ask Claude exactly the same question. So here's a rundown of the news for the last 7 days from Claude. Labour leadership crisis. Starmer clings on. Before I read this, I will just remind you of my prediction about Starmer, that by June, July, he would no longer be in office. We're the 10th of June, so I've still got a couple of weeks, and I did say June to July. So we'll see. We'll see if he's still there in a couple of weeks' time. The biggest ongoing story in UK politics. The Labour government has faced sustained criticism from across the political spectrum. Figures on the right over immigration and tax, and figures on the left over the Gaza war, welfare reform, and the refusal to introduce a wealth tax. These controversies produced poor Labour results in the 2025 and 2026 local elections. By mid-May, over 95 Labour MPs had called on Starmer to resign or set a departure timetable. And Health Secretary Wes Streeting, 4 junior ministers and 4 ministerial aides had resigned in protest. Starmer has refused to stand down, insisting he won't change course because the political weather has turned. He is like the captain clinging on to a sinking ship. I have made comment on this numerous times. Like I say, I really firmly believe that by July he'll be gone. Mr. Wes Streeting, the 4 junior ministers, I'm not so sure about why they would have resigned. It says in protest. I don't think Wes Streeting resigned in protest. I think Wes Streeting resigned because he knew that the political temperature for him was very, very hot, because he was best mates with Mandelson for a start, but also it came to pass that he's been accepting private health companies' funding money. So I think he jumped before he was pushed when it comes to Mr. Streeting. Changing course because of the political weather has turned. The political weather has definitely turned. Regardless of who is in charge of the Labour Party, it's their policies that are the issue. It's their policies that are the problem. So it doesn't matter who comes up next. If the policies remain, then we are still going to have a problem with the Labour government. They know that if they call a general election today, they would lose. They know they would lose. From our point of view as Joe Schmo public, you and me, it doesn't matter who's in power. It really doesn't matter who's in power, because it doesn't matter if Conservatives got in. It doesn't matter if Restore got in. It doesn't matter if Reform gets in. They all sing to the tune of the global cabal. So what the global cabal want, any party that gets into power will bow down to it. They will. This is why we need to disband our government and start again. Point 2. Makerfield by-election. 8 days away. The Makerfield by-election is widely expected to take place on the 18th of June 2026. It was triggered by the resignation of Labour MP Josh Simmons, who stepped down explicitly to clear a path for Greater Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham to return to Westminster and position himself for the Labour leadership. Fresh polling shows Burnham extending his lead over Reform UK, while Nigel Farage faces criticism that his response to the killing of Henry Nowak may have narrowed the party's appeal. Burnham has said he intends to seek the Labour leadership if he wins, increasing the national significance of the contest. Novara Media has been calling it one of the most consequential by-election in years. It probably is one of the most consequential by-elections in years if you're a politician. If you're a politician, it will be really consequential. If you're Joe Public, like you and me, it won't be that consequential because the policies are still in place. And this Andy Burnham is not going to change them because he's a staunch Zionist and he supports the billionaire cabal. So it won't change. Nothing will change. But it's very consequential for the politicians, or as we fondly call them, puppeticians. Okay, point 3, social media ban for under 16s takes shape. Now, before I read what Claude has to say about this, if you do not understand at this exact moment in time that the social media ban for under 16s has got nothing to do with protecting our children, then, well, you've been hiding under a rock. They want the digital ID to be brought in. They want it, and they have told us that they're not going to make us have it. We're not going to make you do it. We're not going to make you do it at all. But they're doing measures like this. Because if you use social media, such as I use social media, and you probably use, well, you do use social media, you're on YouTube. So if you use social media, you have to prove to that social media that you're over 16. And how do you have to do that? You have to have a digital ID. So no, we're not going to make you do it. It just means you won't be able to use social media if you don't have a digital ID. So it's got nothing to do with looking after our children. It has nothing at all to do with safeguarding children. Nothing. Now I've had my little rant. I'll read it. The UK looks set to impose a social media ban for under 16s ahead of the Makerfield by-election, with Starmer expected to announce plans in a speech. One of his absolutely awful speeches. I can't listen to the man without wanting to punch something. The government's public consultation, Growing Up in the Online World, ran from March to late May and received over 116,000 responses, with analysis due in summer 2026, so not very long away. Ministers have been considering evidence from Australia, which imposed a blanket ban in December, and reports suggest the UK version will exclude apps like YouTube Kids. Critics, including children's rights groups, have questioned enforcement and whether it takes a prolonged battle with US tech giants, or whether it risks a prolonged battle with US tech giants. Well, like I say, they're trying to couch it that they're looking after our children, they want to safeguard our children. No, they don't. They want to bring in some form of you having to prove who you are. That's what they want to do. Point 4. Parliament to debate Israel influence in UK politics. I told you about this. Do you remember we had that petition that thousands upon thousands of people signed, and it was a government petition to ask our government to look into Israeli influence in our political spectrum, and it got the recommended amount of signatures, and government turned around and said, no, we're not going to do it. We're not going to debate it. We don't want to look at it. La, la, la. They had their la, 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 I'm not listening fingers in. They weren't interested. And basically they went no to the people. To the people, they told us no. Well, that didn't go down very well with the people. And now they've backtracked and said, okay, we will then. And I brought that to you probably about 2 or 3 weeks ago, because they actually sent me a letter, because I was one of the signatories on the petition, to say we are going to debate it. So Parliament is set to debate the need for an inquiry into Israeli influence on the UK politics after more than 116,000 people signed a petition calling for a probe. The debate comes after the Labour government said it does not support a public inquiry and raises concerns about reported Israel state-linked and pro-Israel lobbying activity. The debate is scheduled for the 22nd of June and will be broadcast on the Parliament YouTube channel. So they are going to debate it. We will watch it. I'll actually be away for the summer solstice when this is going on. I will do my best to watch it, and we will discuss it when I come back from my summer solstice break. Okay. Point 5. I'm very excited that they're actually debating it. But part of me is really excited because it's like, yes, they're going to debate it. The other cynical side of me says, yeah, but you know how it's going to go. You know how it's going to go. They're going to, oh, no, we're not looking at that. Oh, no. We know what our politicians are like. Point 5. The Mandelson-Epstein fallout continues. Earlier this year, but still rumbling, British police launched a criminal investigation into Labour elder statesman. That's what they're calling him now, not Lord. Labour elder statesman Peter Mandelson, over alleged misconduct in public office tied to his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, centering on whether he improperly shared market-sensitive government information with Epstein more than a decade ago. Mandelson has since quit the House of Lords over the latest Epstein files. That's another jump before you pushed. Released by the US Justice Department, and the King's brother, no longer Prince, says Claude, also moved out of Windsor Castle in disgrace. The episode has renewed pressure on Starmer over his controversial decision to appoint Mandelson as UK ambassador to Washington in late 2024. Well, as if you couldn't really put much more pressure on Starmer, could you? But he's still clinging on by his fingernails. Okay, well, I understand why they're looking at the improper shared market sensitive government information. I would be more inclined to do him for basically bad behaviour when it comes to being in the files in the first place, because we know what the files are about. So whether there's an investigation into him taking part in any of the debauched behaviour, I would look at that as well. But maybe they haven't got the information on that. Okay, so that's it from Claude. Quite a lot of stuff about politicians and politics as usual, but not. It's different from Copilot, which is interesting, but not anything that I would dive deeply into when it comes to health and well-being. So, as always, we'll then go on and ask Gruck the same question. So here are the top UK news stories for the past 7 days, according to Grok. Point 1, anti-immigration protests and riots in Belfast, then spill over to Scotland is the dominant story. Violent unrest erupts in Belfast on June the 9th, so that was yesterday, following a knife attack the previous evening in North Belfast. A Sudanese asylum seeker, reportedly Hadi Alodid, 30, granted UK refugee status, was arrested and charged with attempted murder after allegedly stabbing and attempting to decapitate a local man in his 40s named Stephen Ogilvie. Right, they've spelt it differently in some reports, evidently, who suffered serious injuries, including loss of an eye. Protesters torched cars, buildings, and targeted areas, with reports of masked men, smashed windows, and tensions over immigration. Some outlets described it as bringing back memories of past unrest. Protests spread, with disorder reported in Glasgow, arrests and injuries to officers and public. Politicians and groups called for calm, condemning racist thuggery, while others highlighted public frustration. Far-right figures and online discourse, including Tommy Robinson mentions, were linked by some to inflamed tensions. That doesn't surprise me. This has been heavily covered on platforms like GB News, Belfast Burns Amid Fury, and Independent Voices, with discussions on migration policy, asylum, and integration failures. It is a failure. It's definitely a failure of some magnitude, really, that this man was able to commit this atrocity. It's definitely a failure of some magnitude. Now, he was granted UK refugee status from Sudan. I've spoken about this before. I do not condone his actions at all in any way, shape, or form, but I have spoken about how when people come into our country from a country where violence like this is not commonplace, but is pretty usual, it happens a lot. There's an idea when you look at the circumstance that you're taking someone out of a violent situation in their own country. And I'm not saying that his reaction would have been acceptable in any situation, but when you put him into what I would class as a reasonably peaceful country, like our country, compared to Sudan, that the magnitude of his response to whatever happened is far more outlandish in our eyes than it probably is in his. However, like I say, doesn't condone his actions at all. It will undoubtedly unfold more as time goes on. Point 2, Labour government immigration work policy criticisms. Reports of the UK government under Keir Starmer planning to pay British firms £5,000 per foreign worker hired amid ongoing youth unemployment concerns. This has drawn sharp criticism from alternative outlets as prioritising migrant labour over British workers. Broader context includes ongoing debates on net migration, asylum processing, and related social tensions. Well, it couldn't have come at a worse time. It couldn't have come at a worse time. The UK government planning to pay British firms £5,000 per foreign worker hired. Like, this gets into the DEI, the diversity, equity, and inclusion kind of side of things. I'm not so sure whether ongoing youth unemployment Are they trying to say that our youth don't want to do the jobs that immigrants would do? Kind of sounds like it. And I'm not so sure that's the case. I'm not so sure that our youth aren't able to do the jobs or don't want to do the jobs. So there's something else sitting behind this, I think, and I think it's something to do with the government trying to get people to accept foreign workers. However, if they're paying the firms £5,000 per head, that's never going to go down well with general workers. Point 3, UK climate net zero policy updates. The government proposed a new carbon budget aimed for an 87% emissions cut by 2040 versus the 1990 levels to stay on track for 2050 net zero. This has sparked debate on costs. £880 billion investment over 25 years with claimed economic benefits, feasibility and political opposition, e.g. from Conservatives and Reform. The UK's net zero economy is valued at over 100 billion a year by some analysis. Net zero. When it comes to our climate, I've shown before that we're actually coming out of a cooling period, and that the globe has been the coolest it's ever been on record, ever. And it makes you wonder why they're all screaming about climate change if it's the coolest that it's ever been on record. And then you read that it's valued at 100 billion a year. And that just clears it all up, doesn't it? It clears it all up. 880 billion investment over 25 years to make it carbon zero. Then when they go to their conferences to discuss all of this, they don't even share a private plane. They don't even share a private plane. So it's absolute crap. It's absolute crap. But we know why it's happening, because it's worth so much money. 100 billion a year. That's why we get it forced down our throats. Other notable mentions: foreign policy defence, joint statements with European leaders on Ukraine support, discussions around Chagos Islands, potential Royal Navy changes. I wonder if those potential Royal Navy changes have got anything to do with, I don't know, maybe the Israeli government coming in, as they have in America. The Israeli forces are evidently merging with the US forces when it comes to their Air Force army. Yeah, so it wouldn't surprise me if our government had decided they were going to do the same. They're going to try and make some form of defence group that's global, and you just know who's going to be governing that, don't you? Economy and energy. Various reports on energy prices, business rescues, e.g. pottery firm, and pension benefits adjustments. Well, I didn't know anything about that. Miscellaneous. Prince William on AI for homelessness. Cultural sports stories. World Cup prep. An independent commentary on bonkers Britain from voices like Katie Hopkins. I've never really been a follower of Katie Hopkins, but I hear she's doing some quite interesting work. She's doing some quite interesting investigations, and she's very outspoken, so I may start following her. When it comes to Prince William on AI for homelessness, that's just rich, isn't it, really? It's really rich. The Belfast events overwhelmingly dominate recent independent coverage, reflecting heightened public sensitivity around crime, immigration and social cohesion. Sources like GB News, I would argue not alternative media, Byline Times and various independent commentators provide the bulk of non-corporate angles. Stories can evolve quickly, check primary alternative sites for updates. And that's it from Grok. Okay, again, not a lot that I would go deeply into from a health and wellbeing point of view. But it's not, it is political from Grok. It's very political from Claude. And it was a little bit political from Copilot. But as of now, that is the news for this week.